simple branched tubular glands. They coil distally, so you pick up a lot of cross sections. Okay? These areas here, these are your gastric pits. Now, in this region here, in the cardiac region, and this is also true for the pyloric region, most of the cells that make up the glands are mucous neck cells. In the cardiac region, and again in the pyloric region, most of these cells are mucous neck cells. You don't find many parietal cells or chief cells in these two regions, in the very proximal and the very distal stomach. But if instead you were to look in either the body or the fundus of the stomach, you would pick up additional types of cells. You would start to see parietal cells. Those are large eosinophilic cells that produce hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. Also, within the body and the fundus, you would start to pick up chief cells. And the chief cells are going to be located near the base of the glands, way down here. You will also see enteroendocrine cells, okay, in the deepest part of the glands. So if we look at this particular slide, this is from the pylorus. Most of these cells on the surface would be called surface mucus cells. This is the gastric pit. And then these cells that line the glands here are mostly mucous neck cells. Okay. If we go into the body of the fundus, you're going to start picking up these larger light staining cells. These are the parietal cells. And then deep within the glands, these darker staining cells are chief cells. Remember, the chief cells produce pepsinogen and gastric lipase. They produce enzymes. Now, this tissue between glands, deep to the epithelium, is all lamina propria. So this is all lamina propria here. This would be the muscularis mucosa. So the glands are going to extend to the muscularis mucosa. Submucosa, 3 layers of the muscularis externa, serosa. Okay. This is going to be the fundus. Okay. Again, gastric pits. In the fundus in the body, the gastric pits are relatively shallow. And then these lighter staining cells, you don't see them very distinctly. These are going to be more parietal cells. Down here, these darker staining cells are going to be chief cells. This demonstrates an artist rendition of a parietal cell. We said parietal cells, one of the things they do is produce hydrochloric acid. Well, how do they do that? Well, there's a chemical reaction where water and CO2 react under the influence of carbonic anhydrase to form carbonic acid. Carbonic acid then dissociates into hydrogen and bicarb. And then the cell secretes the hydrogen through a hydrogen potassium pump using ATP into the lumen of the stomach. At the same time, it's secreting chloride, producing hydrochloric acid. Okay. Notice that as a result of this equation, you not only produce hydrogen, but in producing hydrogen, you produce bicarb. And that bicarb gets reabsorbed into the bloodstream. Okay. Remember that these parietal cells have receptors for various mediators produced within the body. One of those mediators is gastrin. Last class we said that G cells, a type of enteroendocrine cell within the stomach, is capable of secreting gastrin. It secretes the gastrin in the presence of food. Gastrin is going to bind to these parietal cells and stimulate this reaction, which results in production of hydrochloric acid. Now, what this means is after a meal, you have bicarb entering into the bloodstream. That bicarb is going to be filtered by the kidneys and then enter into the urine. So following a meal, we see what's called an alkaline tide. Okay, the pH drops increases slightly, and the urine becomes more alkaline. So this is referred to as the alkaline tide. Are there other receptors that stimulate acid production? Yes. Remember, parasympathetic fibers stimulate the stomach. Parasympathetics release hydrochloric acid. When hydrochloric acid binds to parasympathetic fibers release acetylcholine. When acetylcholine binds to receptors on the parietal cell, that also stimulates this reaction. So the parietal cells have numerous receptors, some of which stimulate acid production. All right, this shows the stomach incised open. This is the lesser curvature. The stomach here was incised along the greater curvature. You can see the rugae, and in this particular stomach you see ulcerations. These are gastric ulcers. Notice that gastric ulcers tend to form along the lesser curvature, which is surprising because you would think, because of gravity, the fact that gastric juice, which is very acidic, layers along the greater curvature, that most ulcers would occur in that location. But it's not the case. Most ulcerations occur along the lesser curvature. These are erosions into the submucosa. Microscopically, you can see this erosion burrowing into the wall of the stomach. What's interesting is that when you have an ulcer, most of the rugae radiate out away from the ulcer like spokes of the wheel. And you can see that not only endoscopically, but if you do an upper GI series where the patient swallows barium, you can see the folds radiating away from the ulcer. Now, if an ulcer penetrates through the wall of a blood vessel, let's say a vessel within a submucosa, like we saw one of those veins, then you're going to have a bleeding ulcer. If that ulcer penetrates through the entire thickness of the wall, like we see this one here doing, then you're going to have a perforated ulcer. A perforated ulcer will lead to peritonitis. It will lead to the escape of gastric contents into the surrounding peritoneal cavity and cause a tremendous amount of inflammation. Now, with formation of a perforated ulcer, you can allow air from within the GI tract to escape into the peritoneal cavity. If the patient is in the upright position, that air is going to move up underneath the diaphragm, as we see here, between the liver and the diaphragm. Okay. Air beneath the diaphragm, as we see here, is a sign of perforation. It doesn't necessarily have to be the stomach. You could have a perforated appendix. Anything that allows air from the GI tract to escape into the peritoneal cavity is going to bring about air beneath the diaphragm. Okay? And that's a surgical emergency. So if someone suddenly develops severe abdominal pain and you're concerned about rupture of a viscus, of some type of viscera, then you have to check it's called a flat and upright film of the abdomen. And in the upright film, you're looking for gas to come up beneath the diaphragm. Now, generally, if someone develops peritonitis, their bowel sounds are going to become quiet. They're going to develop increased abdominal tenderness, abdominal wall tenderness, and their abdomen is going to become rock hard. You won't be able to press down on it. They'll exhibit what's called guarding. Okay, so those are physical signs of peritonitis. Yeah, JJ.
So how long could a patient go in this condition?
Oh, they may go for, they'll be in a lot of pain, so they're not going to go for too long.
Okay.
Because they're going to be screaming for pain. They're going to say, call a doctor.
Okay.
Okay, so they're not going to go for long.
So
nobody lives with peritonitis.
So guarding is when it's board-like?
Well,
or all of this?
No, that's all part of the picture. Okay. In other words, their abdomen is board-like and stiff. They don't want you to even press into, along the wall because it causes extreme tenderness. What's happening is you're stretching the parietal peritoneum and it's inflamed. And so they guard. And there's another phenomenon where you press in and if you let go, the pain intensifies. That's called rebound pain or rebound tenderness. So those are all physical findings associated with peritonitis. Your abdomen becomes very quiet. You don't get the normal bowel sounds. All right, now we're going to move on to the small intestine. The first part of the small intestine is called the duodenum. We talked last class about how the duodenum and the pancreas, while they began life within the peritoneal cavity, during embryologic development, both the duodenum and pancreas moved into the retroperitoneal space. So these are actually retroperitoneal organs. That's why you don't see the duodenum suspended by a mesentery, as we see with the other parts of the small intestine. Okay? The duodenum is only about 10 inches in total length. Okay? Now, remember that at the junction with the stomach, you have the pyloric sphincter. The duodenum sweeps around in a C-shaped configuration, like the letter C. Distally, then, it moves forward into the peritoneal cavity. As it moves forward, it picks up mesentery. So it becomes intraperitoneal. Now, once it does so, it's no longer the duodenum. It now becomes the jejunum. The jejunum, like the rest of the small intestine, is highly coiled. It has a mesentery that suspends it within the cavity. It's about 8 feet in total length. Okay. It moves down toward the right lower quadrant of the abdomen. Okay. At some point, it transitions into the ileum, the distal part of the small intestine. The ileum is a little bit longer. It's about 10 feet, but again, highly coiled. Distally, the ileum here is going to join the large intestine. Okay. Just as we had a pyloric sphincter that separated the stomach from the small intestine, there is what's called an ileocecal valve that sits here between the ileum and the large intestine. Ileocecal valve. Externally, if you're simply looking at the small intestine from the outside, grossly, you can't differentiate the jejunum from the ileum except by proximity to the large intestine. If in the dog I point out a section of the small intestine that's close by the large intestine, then you know it's the ileum by its proximity. But in terms of gross appearance, otherwise, you can't differentiate. On the other hand, under the microscope, it's easy to differentiate those two organs. They look different microscopically, but grossly from the external appearance, except for their location, they're difficult to differentiate. We said that the ileum is going to join the large intestine. Okay? Where it joins, this little pouch sitting below the ileocecal valve is called the cecum. The cecum. Okay. I like to say that the cecum is the only part of the intestines mentioned in the Bible. Psalms 6:22 for all of you Bible scholars. Cecum, and you shall find them. Now, hanging from the cecum, vermiform appendix. Moving in the other direction, above the ileocecal valve, this is the ascending colon. It's ascending toward the liver. It's ascending toward the liver. We'll come back to the rest of the large intestine a little bit later. Okay. Let's look at now relationships. Within the upper abdomen. Just got some new markers. This is okay. I'm drawing here the stomach and the duodenum. We said that the duodenum has a C-shaped configuration. The pancreas is retroperitoneal. It sits right next to the duodenum. In fact, the head of the pancreas sits within the open part of this C. Okay. So I've drawn in the pancreas in relationship to the duodenum. Remember that both of these organs are retroperitoneal. With regard to the pancreas, this would be called the head. This would be the body. And this would be the tail. Now it looks like a little tadpole. It's much larger. I'm going to draw something else. Let's put the liver up here. And then let's put the gallbladder. The gallbladder is going to sit along the inferior surface of the liver like this. Okay. Now, one of the jobs of the liver is to produce bile. And that bile produced by the hepatocytes, the liver cells, will accumulate within either the right or the left hepatic duct. And these ducts are going to carry the bile away from the liver. So I'm drawing here the right and then the left hepatic duct. When the right hepatic duct joins the left hepatic duct, okay, they form the common hepatic duct, which then leaves the liver like this. That will be the common. Okay. Now at the same time, the gallbladder houses bile. When the gallbladder contracts,